Hello, dear members of the Loving Truth Stories family. Today, we bring you a romantic story that will stir your heart. So let's begin, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you never miss another meaningful story. The doors of the chapel creaked open and the room fell silent. A young woman stepped inside, her face hidden beneath a veil, her heart pounding with every step. She wasn't walking toward love, she was walking into a contract. Behind that veil was a soul carrying the weight of her family's survival. At the altar stood Adrian Hale, a billionaire heir with cold, steel-gray eyes. To him, she was nothing more than an obligation, a name on a piece of paper that held the key to his fortune. He didn't smile. He didn't even blink. But in that moment, one woman's quiet courage and one man's stubborn pride collided. And what began as a cold arrangement would ignite a storm of betrayal, sacrifice, and an unexpected love powerful enough to break every wall around their hearts. The skies over Savannah were heavy that morning, gray clouds hanging low like the weight pressing down on Alara Morgan's heart. She stood in front of the old mirror in her grandmother's room, wrapped in a white gown that had been stitched and restitched so many times it no longer belonged to this era. Her deep brown eyes, usually calm and bright, looked unsettled beneath the sheer veil resting on her head. Her grandmother, Agnes, adjusted the fabric with trembling hands. "You're doing the right thing, child," she whispered, voice heavy with age and sorrow. "This marriage will keep our land safe. It's all we have left of your grandfather." Alara nodded, though the words caught in her throat. At 25, she had imagined a wedding filled with joy, music, and love. Instead, this was a contract, ink and signatures masquerading as vows. Across town, in a glass-walled penthouse overlooking the city, Adrian Hale fastened his tie with mechanical precision. 31, powerful, devastatingly handsome, and colder than steel, Adrian had built an empire in tech investments on top of the fortune his father left him. But that same father had also left one final demand: marry the woman he had chosen or lose everything. "This is insane," Adrian muttered, pacing by the window. His best friend Mason lounged on the leather sofa, sipping whiskey as though nothing in the world could bother him. "Relax, Adrian. It's 1 year. That's what the lawyer said, right? You play husband for 12 months, get your inheritance, then file for divorce. She goes her way, you keep your empire, simple math." Adrian's jaw tightened. He hadn't even met her, just some girl from a once-respected Savannah family now clinging to survival. In his mind, she was probably desperate, plain, and willing to trade herself for money. The thought repulsed him. "Have the prenup ready," Adrian said sharply. "I want her signature before the ceremony." The chapel smelled of roses and polished wood. Only a handful of people filled the pews, her family on one side, his father's old associates on the other. No friends, no laughter, just witnesses to a deal. Alara stood at the back, veil covering her face completely. Through the fabric, she saw the tall, broad figure waiting at the altar. Adrian Hale, her future husband, a stranger. As the music swelled, she walked forward, each step heavier than the last. Adrian didn't even glance at her. To him, she was nothing more than a requirement. The officiant's voice echoed through the hollow space. Vows were spoken without meaning. Papers were signed. 2 lives bound not by love but by necessity. Afterward, Alara stepped outside into the cool air, the veil still hiding her expression. She stood on the porch, staring out at the line of ancient oak trees when Adrian finally approached. "Our flight leaves in 2 hours, he said flatly. "The car will be here soon." "I'm ready," she replied softly, though her voice carried a quiet strength. Adrian studied her briefly, trying to pierce through the veil, but quickly dismissed the thought. She was just his wife on paper, nothing more. Yet, as the wind lifted the edge of her veil for a split second, he thought he saw something in her eyes, something unyielding, something he couldn't quite name. This was supposed to be a transaction, nothing else, but unbeknownst to both of them, This cold arrangement was the beginning of a story neither expected, one that would challenge pride, expose secrets, and perhaps even heal wounds they both carried too deeply to admit. The private jet hummed steadily as it cut across the night sky, leaving Savannah behind. Alara sat near the window, her hands folded neatly in her lap, veil now tucked away in a small case. She watched the clouds drift by, trying to anchor herself in their calm. But nothing about her life felt calm anymore. Across from her, Adrian sat with a tablet in his hand, scrolling through emails, his expression unreadable. He hadn't said a word to her since they boarded. He didn't need to. Every line of his body screamed distance, control, and dismissal. "You'll have your own suite at the house," Adrian finally said, breaking the silence. "We'll keep appearances in public, but otherwise, our lives remain separate." Alara nodded, though her chest tightened. Appearances. That was all this marriage was ever meant to be. Days turned into weeks. Boston was cold compared to Savannah, but Alara forced herself into a rhythm. While Adrian buried himself in work, she found refuge in the city's libraries and museums. 3 afternoons a week, she volunteered at a local literacy center, teaching adults to read and write. For the first time since the wedding, she felt useful, like she mattered. At home, however, silence reigned. Adrian left early, returned late, and rarely acknowledged her presence beyond curt words about schedules or public appearances. When they dined together at charity events, he played the perfect husband, smiling just enough, offering his arm for photographs. But the moment the cameras disappeared, so did the warmth in his eyes. Alara told herself she could endure it. A year. Just 1 year and her grandmother's land would be safe. She could disappear after that, but the illusion of certainty shattered one evening. It was during a gallery event downtown. Adrian, as usual, was cornered by investors, and Alara wandered alone among the paintings. The bold strokes of ocean landscapes pulled her in, reminding her of Savannah's wide skies. She whispered a line she had once read, "Thou mayest," the most important word. "I didn't expect you to know Steinbeck," a voice interrupted. Startled, she turned to see Richard Montgomery, a sharply dressed man in his 40s, with kind eyes but an unsettling intensity. He introduced himself warmly, but his gaze lingered longer than casual politeness allowed. "You're Gerald Hale's trustee, aren't you?" Alara asked cautiously, recognizing his name from overheard conversations. Richard smiled. "One of them, yes, and may I say you are not what I expected." The remark unsettled her, though she wasn't sure why. Later that evening, after the event had ended, Richard requested a word with Adrian. They stepped aside into a quiet corner. Lara, left alone, tried not to listen, but their voices carried farther than intended. "The full inheritance doesn't transfer after 1 year," Richard said, his tone calm but firm. Adrian's voice sharpened. "That wasn't in the paperwork. It was in the trust documents. Perhaps your lawyers didn't bother with the fine print." "What exactly are you implying?" Adrian demanded. "I'm telling you the trustees must be convinced this marriage is genuine," Richard replied evenly. "Not an arrangement, not a performance. Genuine." Alara's heart stuttered. She froze in place, every word slicing into her like ice. Genuine. Her entire sacrifice, her grandmother's security, rested on convincing strangers that her cold, distant husband truly loved her. That night, the penthouse was silent except for Adrian's pacing footsteps. Hours passed before he finally emerged from his office, looking more furious than Alara had ever seen. "My lawyer confirmed it," he said without preamble. "The trustees have discretion. They'll decide when, if the inheritance is released." Alara looked up from the book she hadn't been able to read. "So what happens now?" Adrian exhaled, running a hand over his face. For once, the mask of control slipped. "It means we don't just have to be married on paper. We have to look married to everyone." Her pulse quickened. "You want me to pretend?" His eyes locked on hers. "I want you to play the role of a devoted wife. Publicly, constantly, until Richard and the others are convinced. Ilara's breath caught. This wasn't what she agreed to. She had sacrificed her freedom for a contract, not for a performance that blurred the line between lies and her own fragile heart. The next morning, she found a note slipped under her bedroom door. The Philharmonic Gala. Tonight. 7:00 p.m. Be ready. Not an invitation, not even a request. Just another demand. For a long moment, she thought of refusing. She thought of walking away, letting Adrian face his downfall alone. But then her grandmother's face flashed in her mind, weathered and weary, clutching the deed to the land that defined their family's history. Ilara closed her eyes, steadying herself. For her family's sake, she would endure, even if it meant playing the role of a woman in love with a man who couldn't even stand to look at her. The Philharmonic Gala sparkled with chandeliers and gowns, stitched in Paris. 100 cameras flashed as Boston's elite filed in, each smile sharp as a blade. Ilara tightened her grip on Adrian's arm as they entered, the warmth of his tuxedo sleeve foreign against her skin. "Smile," Adrian whispered through clenched teeth. Her lips curved, though her eyes remained steady. This was the game now, pretending to be the wife of a man who looked at her like she was a business deal he'd been forced into signing. As they moved through the crowd, Ilara felt every gaze land on her, assessing, comparing, whispering. She had never belonged in such a place, and she knew it. Yet she held her chin high, recalling her grandmother's words. "Morgan women bend, but we don't break." Dinner was served beneath the glitter of crystal chandeliers. Adrian spoke effortlessly with investors and colleagues, his public persona polished and magnetic. To outsiders, he was the perfect host, confident and composed. Beside him, Ilara played her part, attentive, gracious, never faltering. But then a familiar voice cut through the hum of conversation. "Adrian, darling, I didn't expect to see you here." The words were silk wrapped around poison. Turning, Ilara found herself face to face with a tall, elegant woman in a crimson dress. Her blonde hair shimmered under the lights and diamonds rested at her throat. She smiled, but her eyes were daggers. "Victoria," Adrian muttered, his jaw tightening. So this was her, the ghost Ilara had only sensed in passing remarks and whispers. Victoria Morrow, the woman Adrian once loved, or perhaps the woman he had once believed was worthy of him. Victoria's eyes slid to Ilara, lingering a fraction too long. "And this must be your wife," she said, the pause before wife dripping with disbelief. "How unexpected." Ilara felt her stomach twist, but she held Victoria's gaze. "Some connections don't require years to form," she said smoothly. "When it's right, you know." Adrian's hand tightened slightly over hers. To onlookers, it looked like affection. To Ilara, it felt like a warning, don't slip. Later, away from the crowd, Adrian's voice was sharp. "You don't know her, you don't know what she's capable of." Ilara crossed her arms. "She knows you, though, and she knows enough to sense this marriage isn't what it looks like." He cursed under his breath, pacing like a caged animal. For once, Ilara saw not just arrogance in his eyes, but something raw, fear. "She can ruin everything," Adrian admitted, almost to himself. "Victoria doesn't care who she hurts as long as she wins." Ilara studied him, surprised. Was this the first honest thing he'd said to her since their wedding? The following weeks were a blur of appearances. Dinners, charity events, public outings. Each time, Adrian and Ilara perfected their performance as a couple, his hand on her back, her smile turned just right, stolen glances that meant nothing but looked like everything. Yet in between those staged moments, cracks began to show. One evening, after a dinner with donors, Adrian surprised her by walking into the kitchen himself. He rolled up his sleeves, pulled eggs and bread from the fridge, and cooked with an ease that startled her. "You cook?" Ilara asked, unable to hide her shock. "Not everything," he replied, sliding scrambled eggs onto 2 plates. "But I lived alone before all this. Not everything can be catered." It was such a small moment, but it shook her more than any gala could. watching Adrian lean casually against the counter, hair slightly mussed, a ghost of a smile tugging at his lips. This wasn't the cold man she married. This was someone else, someone she hadn't expected. And for the first time, Alara wondered, who is Adrian Hale when no one else is watching? But Victoria wasn't done. At another fundraiser, she cornered Alara near the bar, a glass of champagne in hand. "Do you know what everyone says about you?" she asked sweetly. "That Adrian didn't even look at you until he saw your face, that he judged you before he knew you. Tell me, Alara, doesn't that haunt you?" The words struck deep. They pierced the insecurity Alara had buried beneath her calm smile, the memory of Adrian's disdain before lifting her veil, the way he saw her as nothing but an obligation. Alara's lips trembled, but she forced herself to meet Victoria's gaze. Some judgments reveal more about the judge than the judged. Victoria's smile curved like a knife. "We'll see." That night, Alara lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Her mind replayed Victoria's words again and again. She hated how much they stung, how much truth they carried. Because deep down, she feared it too, that Adrian only began to notice her once he realized she didn't fit the box he had drawn around her. But then she remembered the breakfast, the small ghost of a smile, the fleeting glimpse of a man who might be more than steel and contracts, and she wondered, dangerously, if the performance they were trapped in was slowly becoming something real. Snow dusted the Boston streets when Victoria made her move. The Hale penthouse had grown warmer in recent weeks, subtle changes Alara couldn't ignore. Adrian left his office door open more often. He lingered longer at the dinner table, and once he even asked about her grandmother with genuine curiosity. But warmth was fragile, and Victoria knew exactly how to shatter it. She cornered Alara at a quiet cafe one afternoon. No cameras, no gala gowns, just two women facing each other across a small wooden table. Victoria set her designer purse down with a deliberate grace and leaned forward, her eyes glittering like cold diamonds. "I'll make this simple," she said, sliding an envelope across the table. $1 million, cash, transferred anywhere you want. All I ask is that you tell the trustees the truth. This marriage isn't real." Alara's fingers froze above the cup of tea she hadn't touched. The envelope sat there like a venomous snake, daring her to lift the flap. "And why," she asked quietly, "would I ever agree to that?" Victoria's smile was all pity and poison. "Because you're smart. You know this charade has an expiration date. Adrian has never stayed with one woman. Do you really think you'll be the exception?" Alara's stomach twisted. The words echoed her own private fears, the ones that crept in during sleepless nights. She pushed the envelope back across the table. "My marriage may not be perfect," she said, voice trembling but steady, "but my loyalty isn't for sale." Victoria tilted her head, studying her as though she were a puzzle. "We'll see how long that loyalty lasts." That evening, Adrian found Alara in the library, staring at the fire without seeing it. He noticed the tension in her shoulders, the way her hands twisted in her lap. "She spoke to you," he said flatly. Alara turned to him, startled. "You knew she would." "She always does," he muttered, pacing the room. "Victoria doesn't accept defeat. She'll use money, power, even lies to get what she wants." Alara's voice broke slightly. "And what exactly did you want with her, Adrian? Was she one of the women you thought belonged in your world? The right schools, the right families, the right pedigree?" His silence was answer enough. The hurt bloomed sharper than she expected. She had told herself she didn't care, that this was only business. But now, with his silence heavy between them, she realized she cared far more than she should. The next day over breakfast, she asked him directly, "Is it true? Did you only ever date women like her?" Adrian hesitated, then nodded once. "Yes, women who fit the life I was expected to live, women who made sense on paper." Her chest tightened. "Not women like me." For a long moment he said nothing. Then, almost too quietly, he added, "Until now." She looked up, startled, but his eyes were open in a way she had never seen before. "That's what changed for me," Adrian continued. "Not just your face, you, the person I discover a little more each day." The words should have soothed her, but they terrified her instead, because a dangerous hope flickered in her chest, and hope could break her in ways contracts never could. But Adrian wasn't finished surprising her. A week later, he pulled her aside in the penthouse study, holding a folder in his hand. "I had my lawyer draft something," he said. "A separate trust in your name for the Morgan land. Even if everything else falls apart, your grandmother's property is safe." Alara's breath caught. "Why would you do that?" Something in his expression shifted, softened. He exhaled slowly, as though admitting the truth cost him more than millions ever could. "Because I couldn't stand the thought of you staying in this marriage only to protect your family. Because your happiness matters to me." He paused, his voice dropping. "Because I don't want you here out of obligation anymore." For the first time since their wedding, Alara saw not just the steel in his eyes but vulnerability, and it shook her to her core. That night, as snow fell outside their window, she lay awake replaying his words. "Your happiness matters to me." Could she believe him? Or was this just another performance, another strategy to secure his inheritance? But when she thought of Victoria's sneer, the envelope of money, and Adrian's quiet admission in the study, one truth began to take root in her heart. The man she had married for survival was no longer just a stranger. And the danger wasn't Victoria, or the trustees, or the contract. The danger was that Alara was beginning to fall for him. The weeks after Adrian created the trust for her grandmother's land passed in a blur of quiet revelations. Alara noticed changes she could no longer ignore. He came home earlier. He left his phone on the counter instead of glued to his hand. He asked about her work at the literacy center, and once he even stopped by unannounced, standing in the back of the classroom, watching silently as she helped an older man sound out words. Later that evening, when she found him waiting by the door, he only said, "You looked happy." It was the first time she'd heard warmth in his voice that wasn't meant for an audience. But happiness was fragile, and Victoria had no intention of letting it last. It happened at a charity dinner on the Cape. The Lighthouse restaurant glowed against the Atlantic backdrop, waves crashing against the cliffs below. Alara wore a simple black gown, hair swept into a soft bun. Adrian's hand rested lightly at her back as they entered, a gesture so natural it almost felt real. Halfway through the evening, Victoria made her entrance. This time, she didn't bother with subtlety. She crossed the room like she owned it, her laughter loud enough to draw attention, her red silk dress a deliberate weapon. "Adrian," she purred, sliding into their circle of conversation. "You didn't tell me you'd be here, or perhaps you wanted it to be a surprise." The investors chuckled politely, oblivious to the undercurrent of venom. Alara excused herself, but Victoria followed her to the terrace. "You can play the devoted wife all you want," Victoria said, her voice low and sharp. "But he'll never love you, not like he loved me." Alara forced herself to remain steady. "If that's true, why are you here? Why are you fighting so hard for a man who supposedly loved you once?" For a moment, Victoria's mask cracked, but then her smile returned, colder than ever. "Because I don't lose, and if I can't have him, I'll destroy him, and you along with him." The confrontation shook Alara, but it was nothing compared to what came next. The following week, a story appeared in the society columns. "Is Adrian Hale's marriage a sham?" The article detailed whispers about contracts, inheritance, and the mysterious girl from Savannah who suddenly became Mrs. Hale. It quoted unnamed sources, poisoned words that bore Victoria's fingerprints all over them. Adrian stormed into the penthouse, fury radiating off him. He threw the newspaper onto the counter. "She's behind this, I should have known." Alara's hands trembled as she picked it up. There it was in black and white, their marriage reduced to gossip, her name dragged through ink and speculation. "This could ruin everything," Adrian muttered. "The trustees, the board, the company. And what about me?" Alara snapped, surprising them both. "Do you care what this does to me, to my family, or am I just collateral damage in your empire?" The silence that followed was suffocating. For the first time since their wedding, Adrian looked wounded, not angry, not arrogant, but wounded. "Alara," he said quietly, "you are not collateral, not anymore." That night he found her sitting by the window, staring out at the snow. He approached cautiously, like a man stepping onto uncertain ground. "I can't erase who I was when this began," he admitted. "The man who judged you before he knew you, the man who married you for convenience." He paused, breath unsteady. "But I can tell you who I am now, the man who sees you, all of you, the woman who fights for her family, who changes lives at a literacy center, who carries herself with grace even when the world tries to break her." Her throat tightened. "And if I hadn't been beautiful, if you had lifted that veil and found someone plain, would you still see all that?" The question hung in the air like a blade. Adrian's silence lasted too long, and her heart began to crack, until finally he said, "I can't answer who I would have been then, but I can answer who I am now. And the man I am now," he took a deep breath, "loves you." The words fell between them like a confession and a vow all at once. Tears welled in Alara's eyes, not from weakness but from the terrifying truth. She wanted to believe him. She wanted it so badly it hurt. But doubt still lingered, seeded by Victoria, watered by her own fears. "Why should I trust you?" she whispered. Adrian reached into his pocket and placed a folded letter in her hands. "Because this was my father's final gift. He wrote it before he died. I only read it last night." Alara unfolded the paper. Her breath caught as she read Gerald Hale's words. "I chose her not for her name or her connections, but for her strength of character. She will challenge you, balance you, and see the man beneath your armor. My hope is that what begins as a requirement becomes a choice, and that you discover, as I did with your mother, that true partnership is life's greatest treasure." When she looked up, Adrian was watching her with something close to fear. "I love you, Alara," he said again, voice steady this time. "Not because of the contract, not because of my father, not because of the inheritance. I love you because you've shown me a different way to live, and the thought of losing you terrifies me more than losing everything else combined." For the first time, Alara believed him. Not fully, not without scars, but enough for her heart to stumble toward his. But Victoria wasn't finished yet, and the final move she was about to play would test whether Adrian's confession and Alara's fragile trust could survive the storm. The storm broke on a Thursday morning. Alara woke to the sound of Adrian's phone buzzing relentlessly. The headlines screamed from every screen. "Hale marriage scandal escalates. Trustees to investigate authenticity." Victoria had gone for the kill. She'd fed documents, half-truths, and carefully twisted stories to the press. The whispers had become accusations, and now the entire city was watching. By noon, Adrian faced the board of directors. Alara sat quietly in the corner, the weight of every gaze pressing against her skin. Some looked sympathetic, others predatory. They were circling, waiting for blood. Adrian stood at the head of the long mahogany table. "You've seen the numbers, you've read the projections, but this company, my father's company, was never just about numbers. It was about vision, about people, about building something that lasts." He clicked the remote. Instead of charts, a photograph filled the screen. Gerald Hale breaking ground on the first factory in 1952, sweat on his brow, a smile on his face. "My father's final request wasn't about control," Adrian continued. "It was about legacy. He believed partnership, true partnership, was the foundation of everything, and for the first time in my life I understand what he meant." He turned, eyes locking on Alara. "I understand because of her." Gasps rippled through the room. Later, in the quiet of the penthouse, Alara found him at the window, shoulders heavy but posture unbroken. "You risked everything," she said softly. He turned, eyes raw, unguarded. "I wasn't risking, I was choosing you." Her heart trembled, torn between disbelief and a fragile, growing certainty. "And if the trustees don't believe us, if the inheritance disappears?" He stepped closer, his voice steady. "Then we build something new together." Tears welled in her eyes. For the first time, the marriage didn't feel like chains. It felt like wings. A week later, the trustees delivered their verdict. Richard Montgomery himself spoke. "We believe this marriage began as an arrangement, but it has become more genuine. And in that, Gerald's wish has been fulfilled." Adrian exhaled sharply, relief flooding his features. But Alara realized in that moment, it didn't matter whether the inheritance was granted, because the love in his eyes was real and it was hers. On their 1-year anniversary, Adrian led Alara back to Savannah, to the land she had fought so hard to protect. Beneath the ancient oak tree, he pulled a small velvet box from his pocket. Her breath caught, expecting jewelry, but inside was a single, worn key. "The key to our new home," Adrian said. "Not the penthouse, not the estates. Here, where it all began, a place for us. A choice, not a contract." Her throat tightened. "Adrian!" He reached into his coat again and pulled out a folded note. She unfolded it to find his handwriting scrawled across the page. "If I could marry you again with eyes open and heart ready, I'd do it every day for the rest of my life. Lift the veil again. This time, let me be the one who waits." Alara looked up, tears blurring her vision. And there he was, Adrian Hale, the man she had once thought a stranger of steel, now kneeling before her with nothing but truth in his eyes. Slowly, she lifted the delicate veil she had saved from their wedding day, the same one that had once hidden her from judgment. But now, as it fell away, there was no fear, no shame, only love. Months later, the world had moved on from the scandal. The headlines faded, the whispers silenced. What remained was stronger than contracts or fortunes. Alara still taught at the literacy center, her joy unshaken by her new title. Adrian still ran Hale Industries, though now he came home earlier, often with flowers in hand. Together, they walked the line between two worlds, wealth and simplicity, power and humility, and discovered that love could bridge them both. And on quiet nights, beneath the oak tree or in their new home, Adrian would whisper the words that had once terrified him but now defined him. "I love you, not because I have to, but because I can't imagine not loving you." As I look back on this story, I'm reminded of something simple yet profound. Love is never about contracts, appearances, or what the world demands of us. It is about choosing, again and again, to see someone for who they truly are. I've lived long enough to know that sometimes we walk into situations out of duty, out of fear, or because life gives us no other choice. But even in those moments, something unexpected can grow. Hearts can change, walls can fall, and sometimes the person we least expect to stand beside us ends up being the one who saves us. So I ask you, what choices are you making today? Are they born out of fear or out of love? Are you willing to look beyond appearances and see the soul standing in front of you? Because often, the greatest treasures are hidden beneath the veils we carry. As the old saying goes, we don't truly live until we learn to love without conditions. If you find this story meaningful and want to help us share these important values, please subscribe to our channel so you won't miss the next inspiring story. Together, we can build a strong community full of potential and a spirit of justice.